At my mother's promotion party, she shocked me by thanking everyone except me, saying some people just hold you back. I just clinked my glass and said, "Cheers, Mom." My ex-boss looked at her and said, "Funny, that's not what the award said." The next day, her office was swarmed by reporters because I'm Dana. 42 years old. PR consultant now. Used to work in corporate communications for a big real estate firm in Chicago, same one my mother, Vivian, worked at, and still does, technically. Vivian isn't the sweet, nurturing type. She's polished, poised, and calculating. She doesn't love, she leverages. And for most of my adult life, I was the one she leveraged the most. You'd think working in the same industry would create some kind of mutual respect. It didn't. I was always her project, the one she molded, the one she controlled, the one she used. And I let her. For years. Until last year, when I spearheaded a high-profile rebranding project for one of our company's luxury residential developments. I put in months of work, negotiated partnerships, managed media outreach, handled stakeholder politics. I pulled off a miracle in PR terms, and it was about to become the biggest feather in my cap. Until she took it. I was at a department meeting when I found out she'd submitted the final version of the project, my project, under her name. Her name alone. And when I confronted her later, in her sleek corner office with the skyline behind her, she barely blinked. It made more sense. I'm senior. You'll get your moment eventually. That was it. No apology. No acknowledgement. Just a power move disguised as a lesson. I resigned quietly a month later. No scene, no drama. I left a goodbye email that was polite and vague. I didn't want to burn bridges, I just wanted peace. But peace never came. She was promoted a few months after that, rightfully due to her successful leadership on the rebrand. And to celebrate, she threw a massive party at the Chicago Cultural Center. Lavish. Formal. Ridiculous, honestly, but that's how she operates. Always selling the illusion. She invited me. I went. I wish I could say I didn't know what I was walking into, but nothing prepared me for what she did that night. I remember standing near the back of the room, a champagne flute in one hand, watching her work the crowd like a politician. The air smelled like wine and fresh flowers, and the room buzzed with polite laughter. She looked radiant, an ice queen wrapped in a silk designer dress, eating up every compliment that floated her way. Then came the speeches. She took the stage with her perfect posture and that voice that always sounded just a little too rehearsed. She started off well. Thanked the board. Thanked her team. Thanked her assistant. Even thanked the caterers. And then, "I've learned a lot on this journey," she said. One of the hardest lessons? Sometimes, the people closest to you aren't lifting you up, they're holding you back. And to truly rise, you have to let them go. She looked straight at me when she said it. I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. I just smiled, lifted my glass, and said loud enough for those around us to hear, "Cheers, Mom." That moment, her smug smirk, my fake smile, the tension so thick you could slice it, it's burned into my memory like a scar. And then something happened I didn't expect. From across the room, someone cleared his throat. Malcolm Reyes. My former boss. Retired now. A good man. Stern but fair. He'd always known what my mother was capable of, though he rarely said it out loud. He raised his voice. Funny, that's not what the award said. The room went still. Just for a beat. My mother froze. Her eyes narrowed just slightly before she turned to laugh it off. But the damage had been done. It was the first time someone with real credibility had challenged her publicly. And people noticed. The whispers started that night. But what came next? That was all me. What she didn't know was that I'd kept everything. Emails. Drafts. Internal decks. Metadata. Notes. Timestamps. Even call recordings from internal meetings. It wasn't about revenge, not then. It was about protecting myself. But after that speech, after the humiliation of being erased in front of colleagues, friends, and even distant family, I knew it was time. I started small. Quiet. I reached out to Malcolm. Asked if he'd be willing to confirm that I had led the rebrand project. He didn't hesitate. Then I contacted an old friend, Lance, a journalist at Crane's Chicago business. We'd worked together during my PR days. He'd been chasing a story on corporate misconduct in the city for a while. I gave him one complete with receipts. The article dropped 3 days later. Executive's promotion called into question after internal whistleblower exposes misattributed work. My name wasn't in the article directly, but it didn't have to be. Within hours, her office was swarmed. Reporters. Legal. PR, damage control. And I sat back, watching the empire tremble. The day after the article dropped, I did what I usually do on quiet mornings. I took a walk along the lakefront trail near Belmont Harbor. The air was brisk, the kind of crisp that stings your cheeks but clears your mind. Chicago in the fall has this bittersweet quality. Cold, beautiful, and unpredictable. Just like my mother. I kept my phone on silent that morning, not because I didn't expect it to blow up, but because I needed to be alone when it did. By the time I got back to my apartment, I had 27 missed calls. 10 were from unknown numbers. 3 were from people at my old job, people who hadn't spoken to me since I left. 1 was from my mother. I didn't answer any of them. Instead, I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at my phone, wondering why I didn't feel satisfied. I had exposed her. She was finally being challenged. Something I spent my entire adult life trying to do quietly, respectfully, through performance and hard work. And now? It had taken one article, one set of documents, and one line of truth from Malcolm to unravel years of her image building. But here's the thing nobody tells you about revenge: it doesn't come with a parade. There's no applause, no moment where you feel the air shift and justice declare itself. It just happens, quietly. Messily. And it leaves you alone with your thoughts. That night, I received an email from someone I hadn't spoken to in a while: Sandra, the company's former HR director. She had retired 6 months before I left. No nonsense, sharp as always, and someone I'd always liked but never gotten close to. Her email was short: I saw the piece. I always knew it was you behind that work. We all did. Some people just don't want to see a younger woman outshine them, especially when it's their own daughter. I hope you're okay. If you ever want to grab coffee, I'd love to catch up. I cried after reading it. Not the dramatic, sobbing kind. Just a slow, silent kind of cry. The kind you feel in your throat before it ever reaches your eyes. Because suddenly, I wasn't invisible. And not just to the public but to someone who'd been watching quietly from the sidelines. Meanwhile, Vivian? Well, her week got worse. The company had to release a statement. It was full of corporate jargon, of course, internal review, standard evaluation procedures, acknowledging concerns brought to our attention. No names. But everyone knew. She stopped appearing in their press coverage. Her smiling face disappeared from the website's leadership section. Her assistant updated her LinkedIn title to Special Advisor instead of Vice President. Subtle changes but meaningful ones. The next time we saw each other was at my Aunt Caroline's birthday dinner. A small gathering. Family only. It had been scheduled weeks before the article, and I briefly considered not going. But then I thought, no. I'll go. I've got nothing to hide. She was already there when I arrived, sitting stiffly on the end of the long table at this quaint little Italian place in Andersonville. She looked off. Tired. Not physically, but energetically. Like someone who knew the mask was slipping and didn't quite know how to keep it up anymore. The moment our eyes met, it was clear she wanted to speak privately. I didn't give her that chance. We all made polite conversation through the salad course, avoiding any topic remotely close to work, media, or recent events. But I caught her stealing glances at me between sips of her wine. Finally, toward the end of dinner, she leaned slightly toward me. "You know," she said, "there's a difference between ambition and betrayal." I didn't look at her. Just reached for my water. "You'd know," I replied softly. "You taught me both." The conversation ended there. It didn't blow up. No shouting. No tears. Just that cold, cutting silence between two people who understood exactly what was being said beneath the words. In the weeks that followed, I found myself fielding more work inquiries than I had in the entire year since I left corporate. Some people called to check in, but really, they wanted to hear the gossip. Others, the good ones, just wanted to work with someone they knew could deliver. I took on 3 new clients. All of them women. All of them either silenced, sidelined, or struggling to be taken seriously by their male-dominated teams. One of them told me, during our intro call, "I heard what happened with your mom. I've been waiting for someone like you, someone who doesn't play the game, but rewrites the rules." And for the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't felt since before that project got stolen: validation. Not because someone said good job, but because someone saw my work, trusted it, and paid for it. Meanwhile, my mother faded. Not publicly, she still held her job, still got invited to events, but the spark was gone. She wasn't the rising star anymore. She was a figure of controversy. Her name came with a question mark now, not an exclamation point. And behind the scenes? Well, she was quietly stripped of key accounts. Moved to an advisory role. Rumors swirled that she'd been asked not to represent the company externally for a while. But she stayed. Because the one thing my mother fears more than being exposed is being irrelevant. And that's what she was becoming. A few weeks after the birthday dinner, I received an email from the company's legal team. It wasn't threatening. If anything, it was almost sheepish in tone. They were seeking clarification on a few of the documents that had been referenced in the article. There was no mention of my mother directly, but the subtext was clear: they were trying to cover themselves, patch up internal processes, and likely quietly discipline her without drawing further public scrutiny. I responded professionally. I provided the original timestamps, the saved documents, and my original emails with project updates, all of which clearly outlined my authorship and role. I kept my tone respectful and neutral. No vengeance. No jabs. Just facts. That's the thing about the truth, it doesn't need a tone. About a month later, one of the senior partners at the firm, a man named Clay Whitman, reached out to me personally. He asked if I'd be willing to come in and do a short training session for their new communications team on brand ethics, crisis strategy, and transparency. I couldn't decide if it was an olive branch or a PR stunt. But I went. Not for them. For me. The moment I walked into the building, I felt a strange sort of detachment. I hadn't been back in almost a year, and everything looked the same glossy floors, same receptionist with the tight smile, same elevator chime. But it didn't feel like it belonged to me anymore. It didn't haunt me. When I reached the 21st floor, the receptionist asked me to wait while they notified the team. And that's when I saw her. My mother. She was walking down the hallway from the West Wing, talking to someone on her phone, her heels clicking like they always did, but slower. Like she wasn't quite sure of her footing anymore. We locked eyes. She didn't stop walking, but her mouth pressed into a hard line, and for a moment, I saw something I'd never seen in her before: not anger, not disappointment. Resignation. There was no grand confrontation, no whispered apology. Just a silence that said, "This is how it is now." The training went well. A dozen young staffers, eager and engaged, asked thoughtful questions. One of them, a woman named Hallie, stayed back after the session and said, "I didn't know you were the one behind that rebrand. We all studied it in our onboarding. They made it sound like your mom did everything." I smiled and said simply, "The people who know, know." Because that's the truth. People do know. Whether they admit it out loud or not. When I got back home that night, I found another email from Sandra, the retired HR director who'd reached out earlier. This one had an attachment. It was a scanned photo. Me, maybe 10 years ago, presenting at a small internal conference. I'd never seen it before. I was standing in front of a projector, mid-sentence, pointing to a slide, totally unaware of the camera. The caption in her email read, "You were always the real deal." Just took a while for people to notice. I stared at that photo for a long time. Not because I looked particularly impressive, or because the lighting was good, it wasn't, but because it reminded me of a time when I still thought doing great work was enough. It still is. It just takes longer when people like Vivian Callister are in your way. Around that time, something else started happening. Women I barely knew started messaging me on LinkedIn. Former colleagues, people from other companies, even 2 competitors. They wanted to talk. Share stories. Ask how I managed to walk away without setting the place on fire. One of them wrote, "Your silence said more than shouting ever could." Another said, "We need more women like you out here, not just surviving, but thriving after it." That meant more to me than anything else in this whole process. Meanwhile, my mother Vivian still hadn't reached out directly again. But I knew through the grapevine that she was simmering. Not retaliating. Just watching. Which was her real talent all along. Not confrontation. Control. Except now, she no longer had it. And the final unraveling? That came when I got a call from a nonprofit board I'd applied to join 3 years ago. Back then, I didn't make the cut. Too junior, they said. Not enough executive visibility. But this time? They wanted me to lead the communications subcommittee. When I asked why now, the chairperson said, casually, "Honestly, we've seen your name come up quite a bit lately. And the way you handled yourself? Quiet strength. We could use that." I hung up the phone and just stared out the window for a while. Chicago was gray that day. A low ceiling of clouds hung over the city, and the hum of traffic felt strangely comforting. Like the world had finally gone back to normal, but on my terms. I hadn't screamed. I hadn't begged. I hadn't burned anything down. I just told the truth. Backed it up. And waited. A few months passed. I didn't hear from her. Not a word, not even through my aunt or cousin, who always tried to play peacemakers. The silence between us stretched so long that it started to feel permanent. Comfortable, even. I'd gotten used to not looking over my shoulder. Not bracing for the next subtle jab. I was running my own consulting firm now, still small, but steadily growing. I was working with good people. Ethical people. Women who had been through the fire and knew how to spot the smoke. And I was happy. Genuinely, quietly happy. For the first time in years. Then, one afternoon, I was sitting in the corner booth of a cafe in Wicker Park, waiting to meet with a potential client, a woman who was leaving her own toxic corporate role and needed help managing her exit strategy. While I waited, I scrolled through my emails. That's when I saw it. Subject: Request for collaboration from Vivian Callister. I stared at it for a while. Not out of shock, it had always felt inevitable that she'd reach out again. What surprised me was the timing. Just as things were finally, solidly good on my end. I opened it. "Dana, I'd like to talk. I have an opportunity one believe would benefit us both. I realize things have been difficult between us, and I won't pretend I handled everything well. Would you consider meeting me for lunch? My treat. Neutral ground. Just to talk. No expectations." Vivian, no expectations. That line made me laugh out loud, softly and bitterly. There had never been a single moment in my life when my mother didn't have expectations. Of me. Of others. Of outcomes. She expected control. Deference. Results. And now, she was asking for a meeting with me on my terms. I didn't respond right away. I let the email sit in my inbox for 5 days. I wanted to be sure. Not angry. Not impulsive. Not hungry for any kind of revenge. Just clear. And when I finally did reply, it was short. Vivian, I'm available next Thursday at 12. Let's meet at Halston's on West Erie. That should be neutral enough. Dana, I picked that place on purpose. It was new, upscale, modern, exactly the kind of place she'd never choose herself. The kind of restaurant where the waiters wear sneakers and linen aprons and call you by your first name. No maitre d' in a suit. No private booths. Just clean daylight, open space, and nowhere to hide. When I arrived, she was already there. Of course. She was always early. Vivian looked good. As always. Elegant but more understated than usual. A gray sweater dress, her hair pulled back, no flashy jewelry. But something about her posture was different. Slightly pulled in. Defensive. Which was almost funny, because that used to be my role. We sat. The waiter took our order, paninis and sparkling water. And then, silence. She started first. I've been thinking about things. About how everything played out. I said nothing. She looked at me, trying to read me. She couldn't. I wasn't giving her anything. You were right, she said finally. About the project. About the work. It was yours. I blinked. Just once. No smile. No warmth. Because this wasn't an apology, it was a confession. Carefully crafted. Delivered with the precision of someone who needed to reclaim some sort of narrative control. You know, she continued, when I took it. I didn't think it would matter. I thought you'd have your chance later. But you got it sooner, didn't you? I raised an eyebrow. Is that what this lunch is for? To tell me I turned out okay, despite you? Her face twitched, just slightly. Then she let out a quiet sigh. This isn't easy for me, Dana. You think I've spent my whole life trying to wreck you. I haven't. I just didn't think you needed the spotlight. You're good without it. I leaned back in my chair. Or maybe you didn't want to share it. She didn't deny it. Instead, she looked down at her glass, ran a finger along the rim, and said something I never expected to hear. I'm not getting the board seat. She said it like a cough. Like something lodged in her throat. They're bringing someone in from the outside. Someone younger. With press attention. Fresh blood. She didn't say my name, but I felt it hovering there between us. That's what this was. She wasn't asking to collaborate. She was trying to borrow credibility. She wanted my shine now that hers had dimmed. And in that moment, it all clicked. Every interaction we'd ever had. Every half compliment. Every maneuver. She didn't see me as a daughter. Or even a rival. She saw me as a resource. Just one she couldn't control anymore. I stood up. Thank you for lunch, I said, calm and even. But I'm not interested in anything that brings your name onto my work again. She opened her mouth to protest, but I shook my head. I don't need this relationship, Vivian. I needed a mother. You made it clear years ago that wasn't something you wanted to be. So let's just call this what it was. She didn't follow me out. She didn't call after me. She just sat there, in that daylight-filled cafe, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. And I walked out, not with a sense of triumph but with a sense of release. That was the real win. And no one even had to clap. It had been 6 months since the lunch at Halston's. We hadn't spoken since. No texts. No emails. Nothing. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't wondering what she was thinking. I wasn't crafting imaginary responses, rehearsing future conversations in my head, or scanning social media to see what rooms she was still trying to dominate. She wasn't in my head anymore. She was just a person I used to know intimately, and now barely understood. Meanwhile, things were good. Better than good. My firm had landed a contract with a major community revitalization initiative on the South Side. It was gritty work, with real people and real stakes. Nothing like the glossy, performative projects I used to do under corporate pressure. This was substance over spin. And it felt right. In between client meetings and late-night strategy sessions, I found myself mentoring more and more young women through panels, calls, workshops. Sometimes officially, sometimes just over coffee. And it always circled back to the same theme: how do you reclaim your voice when someone close to you took it? I never gave them a one-size-fits-all answer. But I always told them this: you don't win by outshouting them. You win by outlasting them. You win by building something they can't take from you. And then, one day, something strange happened. I received a letter. A real one. Handwritten. Mailed. No return address. I opened it at my kitchen counter, under the soft amber light I always turned on in the evenings. It was one page, on ivory stationery. The handwriting was unmistakable. Vivian's. Dana, I'm not asking to be forgiven. I know better than to think that's something I'm owed. But I wanted to say something I never did before, and that I won't have the opportunity to say again. You didn't just inherit your strength, you built it. I saw it early. And I was afraid of it. Because somewhere deep down, I knew you'd become what I never could, whole, without needing me. I was wrong. About so many things. But mostly, I was wrong about you. I hope you'd keep rising, with or without my shadow behind you. I read it once. Then again. Then a third time. Not looking for lies. Just letting it be what it was. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I didn't feel vindicated or angry. What I felt was done. I folded it carefully and tucked it in the back of my desk drawer. Not out of sentimentality, but as proof. Not of the apology, but of the boundary. She had written it. Sent it. And let it stand on its own. No manipulation. No ask. Just an ending. A few weeks later, I was invited to give a keynote at a leadership summit downtown. A big one. My name printed in the same bold font as women I'd once only read about. The theme? Building without permission, the path to authentic leadership. When I stood at the podium, scanning the crowd of professionals, mentors, and future leaders, I didn't think of my mother. I thought of myself. Of that younger version of me, sitting at a desk under fluorescent lights, rewriting her own work so it looked like her boss's style. Of the version who stayed late, worked harder, spoke less, just to earn scraps of praise. She was gone now. And what stood there in her place was someone complete. Not in spite of the pain, but because of it. I ended my talk with a story. Not about betrayal. Not about revenge. About integrity. About the long game. About how the people who try to erase you often end up revealing themselves instead. And when the applause came, not thunderous, not dramatic, just warm and sincere, I smiled. Because this time it was mine. And no one could take it.